Welcome back to the Deep Dive. A warm welcome to all y'all listening, especially the good folks right here in Overton County, Tennessee. We appreciate you joining us. Today, we're taking on something pretty heavy. We're diving deep into some serious claims about the official story of September 11th. The source material we're looking at, well, it's a detailed investigation, and it basically suggests that the foundation of the 9/11 Commission report, the document most folks turn to for the truth, might be built on some shaky ground.
That's exactly right. As we try to seek truth and discernment, whether it's in our faith walk or just in our public life down here, we really have to look close at claims like these. The sources we've gone through, they allege that the official investigation into the attacks was systematically hampered, manipulated even, and that ultimately it functioned more like a political cover-up, maybe designed to shield the Bush administration from having to answer some tough questions.
Mm-hmm. It certainly calls for vigilance, doesn't it? We're going to approach this with the spiritual purpose of trying to shine a light on darkness, like the good book says, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So what's the main, maybe the most troubling question these sources force us to ask about what happened right after 9/11?
Yeah, the core question they really put forward is this. Why did the Bush administration, like immediately after the biggest attack ever on American soil, why did they allegedly fight so hard against having an independent investigation? And, if they fought it, you got to ask, what were they trying to hide? Or maybe who are they trying to protect?
Okay, yeah. Let's unpack that right from the beginning. The towers were still smoldering. People were just reeling. What was the administration focused on right then, according to Richard Clark? He was the counterterrorism czar at the time, right?
Clark was, the sources say he was horrified. He expected to get back to the White House that day, September 11th, and find everybody focused on, securing the country, stopping the next attack. But instead, he describes this incredibly fast pivot toward war. He claims Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz were already using the tragedy to push for this global war on terror, and specifically aiming it straight at Iraq. Clark even wrote that Rumsfeld's first instinct that very afternoon was trying to figure out how to hit Saddam Hussein at the same time as bin Laden.
Wait, hold on. They hadn't even finished the immediate crisis response, and the talk had already jumped to invading Iraq, a country that, well, at that point had no proven operational link to al-Qaeda. That sounds like...
Well, it sounds like an agenda that was already sitting there waiting.
It really speaks to the priorities, doesn't it? And that's why these sources put so much emphasis on the folks who had different priorities, like the 9/11 widows. They became known as the Jersey Girls. They weren't asking for war, they just wanted answers. Yeah, their determination is something else.
Yeah.
Especially when you hear the personal stories. Like Kristen Breitweiser, whose husband Ron was killed. She's talked about that morning.
It's just heartbreaking. But that heartbreak fueled a real movement. Ron, he was only 39, called her that morning, running late for work, told her he was okay because he was in the other building, the second tower. Told her to turn on the TV. She was still on the phone with him, she said, when he whispered, "Sweets, people are falling out the windows." They hung up, and then she watched his building explode just minutes later on TV. That kind of grief and that fierce need to know why weren't they warned? That's what really started the push for an independent commission.
And Washington's response to this demand for truth, it was, according to these sources, aggressive political intimidation. Almost shocking, really. This is where the story takes a dark turn.
It really does. When that first investigation, the joint congressional one led by Bob Graham and Porter Goss, started making some headway, well, the sources claim the Bush administration basically went nuclear on them. They allege Vice President Cheney himself called the Senate Majority Leader at the time, Tom Daschle, and explicitly threatened him, basically saying the investigation was getting in the way of the war effort and needed to stop.
Now that's Jack. That's the executive branch allegedly threatening the legislative branch over an investigation into a national tragedy. That's a really serious accusation of, well, government overreach.
And it gets worse. According to the sources, when that same congressional committee found some really clear NSA intercepts, chatter from al-Qaeda right before the attacks, phrases like, "the match begins tomorrow," and "tomorrow is 0 hour." When those got leaked, the administration reportedly moved fast to shut down the congressional staff who found them.
How do they do that? How do you suppress something like that?
Sources claim the FBI, which was run by Robert Mueller back then, was basically sitched on the committee staff. They were brought in, polygraphed, interviewed, threatened with prison time for leaking classified information. And this created what the sources call a chilling effect. It basically paralyzed that initial investigation. You have to ask, why intimidate the people finding the truth unless that truth was really inconvenient?
And here's where it gets kind of tangled. connecting old political scores to how this all played out. The independent commission we eventually got, the one that wrote the final report, it only happened because John McCain pushed for it, and sources say part of his motivation was payback for the nasty political smears against him back in the 2000 election. But even that commission, the one McCain fought for, was apparently set up to fail right from the get-go.
Exactly. Even when it finally got signed into law, the commission was, and these are the words of its own future chairman, set up to fail. They put it on a really tight leash, just 18 months. They gave it weak subpoena power. And maybe most important, they basically starved it of resources.
Okay, let's pause on that money part for a second.
Yeah.
Because the difference is pretty stark. For an investigation into the biggest attack on U.S. soil, how much money did they actually give it?
Just $3 million. For the whole thing. Now think about the scale of 9/11. The intelligence failures, the foreign policy mess, everything. And they gave it $3 million.
$3 million? I mean, if the government truly wanted people to believe they were serious about getting the whole truth, the unvarnished truth, why risk the look of such a tiny budget?
Well, the sources argue the look wasn't the priority. Containment was. And just to show how little that was, the investigation into the Monica Lewinsky scandal, it got 13 times more funding than the 9/11 investigation. And later on, the Russiagate investigation under Mueller, that got 11 times more funding. The sources say this wasn't just an oversight. It was a signal. Don't dig too deep.
That funding gap alone, I mean, in the eyes of these sources, that's enough to make you question the whole thing right there. Now let's talk about who they tried to put in charge first. Henry Kissinger. If the plan was containment, well, Kissinger sounds like maybe the perfect guy for that job.
Oh, yeah. Critics immediately screamed conflict of interest. The sources we read go into Kissinger's history. Critics calling him a war criminal for expanding the Vietnam War into Cambodia and Laos, his alleged role in the Chile coup. And the 9/11 widows, they zeroed right in on his consulting firm, Kissinger Associates. They worried he might have financial ties to, say, Saudi royals or maybe even members of the bin Laden family.
And that meeting the Jersey girls had with him, it sounds wild. They go to his office, and Kristen Breitweiser claims he cranked the heat way, way up, like uncomfortably hot. Some kind of psychological trick. Why do that? And how did he react when they actually asked him point blank about his clients?
Yeah, the sources claim he got really flustered when they pushed him on representing Saudi interests or maybe the bin Laden family. He went to take a sip of his tea or coffee, spilled it all over himself, and then apparently blamed it on a fake eye he claimed to have. He just completely dodged the question. The pressure from those women was intense, and the sources note he resigned the very next day.
Wow. That really shows the grit of those widows, but also maybe how shaky the administration's first choice really was. So Kissinger's out. Then they bring in former New Jersey Governor Tom Keene. What was Keene told his job was, according to these sources?
Sources allege that Keene was brought in, and he got his instructions straight from top White House advisors. The message was clear. We don't want a runaway commission. So Keene was basically told keep a lid on it. Now, Keene himself later admitted the commission was set up to fail. But the real person pulling the strings, controlling the story, according to these sources, that was the executive director, Philip Zelikow.
Right, Zelikow. He was presented as this neutral historian type, but the claims about him, they make him sound more like a political insider whose job was to protect the administration. What were his actual ties to the White House?
Far from neutral is right. Zelikow was actually an active Bush administration official at the time. He was serving on a White House intelligence panel. He'd worked on Condoleezza Rice's transition team. He even co-authored a book with her. So the guy running the investigation had deep personal political ties to the very administration he was supposed to be investigating impartially.
And let's just underline this next point because it's pretty stunning. Zelikow was allegedly one of the main architects of the Iraq invasion policy. He wrote a key paper arguing for preemptive wars. And if that wasn't enough conflict of interest for you, he was also the same official who decided to demote Richard Clark, the counterterrorism czar, in the months right before 9/11 happened.
Yeah, the connections are they're impossible to ignore, according to these sources. Zelikow was in the perfect spot to be the gatekeeper. And the claim is he used that spot to basically decide what the final report would say before they even gathered all the facts.
Pre-writing the report.
Yeah.
That might be the most damning claim in all this source material. How can you call it a thorough investigation if the ending was already written?
Well, the sources claim Zelikow put together a really detailed outline way back in March 2003. This was before the investigation really even got going. And this outline, it had chapter headings, key conclusions, everything was allegedly almost word for word the same as the final report they published 18 months later. So the allegation is the investigation wasn't about finding the truth. It was about finding evidence to fit a story that was already decided.
If that's true, I mean, that suggests the whole thing was fundamentally dishonest from the start. How did Zelikow make sure his staff couldn't go off script, couldn't deviate from that pre-approved story?
He kept tight control. Sources say he gave himself total power over hiring the staff. Then he kept those staff teams separate, siloed. They couldn't talk directly to the commissioners without his okay. And maybe the most damaging thing, he allegedly made a secret deal with the Justice Department, a deal that blocked the commission from even seeing the files from that first congressional inquiry until the White House got to review them and, presumably, redact them first.
So he controlled the process, controlled the people, controlled the evidence, and you see the result in the language they used, right? Specifically that phrase, found no evidence.
Exactly. That phrase shows up 61 times in the final report. And critics argue that often when the report says they found no evidence for something, it really just means Zelikow's team chose not to look for evidence that might mess up the story they wanted to tell.
And all this, the sources argue, was done with a clear political objective, justifying the war in Iraq. We know Zelikow was taking regular phone calls from Condoleezza Rice and Karl Rove, the political strategist. Rove, interestingly, denied they talked often about the commission, but Zelikow's own phone logs allegedly show otherwise.
Yeah, the political steering seems pretty blatant according to the sources. Like when the counterterrorism team wrote their draft report, sources confirm Zelikow himself stuck in sentences trying to link al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, suggesting bin Laden thought about moving to Iraq. Staff members actually had to complain directly to the commissioners to get those forced connections taken back out.
And then you had the public hearings themselves being used almost like propaganda sessions. This was supposed to be about 9/11, but the hearings were apparently stacked with neoconservative witnesses, people like Abraham Sofair and Lori Milroy.
That's right. The sources claim these witnesses just used their time to talk about why we needed preemptive invasions and to push discredited theories about Iraqi intelligence being behind the 9/11 masterminds. Arguments that really had no place in an objective look at what happened on 9/11 itself. The sources basically conclude the whole commission got turned into a tool to sell the Iraq War instead of finding the truth about why U.S. intelligence failed so badly before the attacks.
So let's try to wrap up the core claims from these sources. They're saying the 9/11 Commission report wasn't really about finding truth. It was a political tool, designed, allegedly, to protect the Bush administration from tough questions and, crucially, to build the case for invading Iraq. The big question that leaves us with is, if these claims hold water, who, even now, benefits from keeping this alleged version of events alive?
That really is the question that lingers, isn't it? Pursuing justice means we got to stand for truth, even when it's hard or politically messy. The sources allege that the failure of the 9/11 Commission shows just how easily our public institutions can get bent towards a political agenda. It reminds me of what the Apostle Paul told us. Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. That's Ephesians 4.25. It's about honesty between us.
And that applies everywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So our remarkable call to action today, for all y'all listening in Overton County and beyond, is this. Never trade truth for convenience. If political forces, as these sources allege, went to such extreme lengths, threatening Congress, underfunding investigations, maybe even pre-writing the outcome to control a narrative up in Washington, well, then we have got to be radically transparent and discerning right here in our own lives and communities. We need to look up, look out, and never stop questioning the stories we're told. We got to protect the integrity of our own local institutions right here in places like Livingston. Demand honesty.
Well said. And thank you for joining us for this pretty heavy deep dive. If what we've discussed today resonates with you, please do like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing these important examinations of the source material to light.
And may the good Lord grant every single one of us wisdom, discernment, and the courage to always seek the truth. We ask for protection from deception in all the ways it tries to creep in. May the good Lord keep all y'all safe down in Livingston and all across Overton County. And to all humans being, wherever you're tuning in from, may you be blessed. We'll see you next time.